Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be providing an update to the bull market support band. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. So I know it has been about a week since we did a video on price action, but I was in Miami, and while I did make one video while I was there, I wanted to spend the rest of the time meeting people, just networking in general, and that was sort of the goal. But now that I'm back and mostly recovered, I don't know how some people do 10 conferences a year, but now that I'm back, let's try to get back into this stuff. So Bitcoin right now is at 26.1, right? 26,100. So the bull market support band is, again, it consists of the 20-week SMA and the 21-week EMA. And right now, that more or less ranges from around 25,534 to 25,636. So basically, you think about it 25.5 to 25.6. It's a pretty tight range. And so what I want to do is I want to make comparisons to 2019, also to 2015, kind of see what's what and who's who in terms of some of this momentum that we've been riding for a while. So right now, we're only just above the bull market support band, right? Just above it. And we've talked about, really since April, the idea of us fading back down into it, right? We've talked about this for months. We even talked about the summer lull, right? The idea that, look, in mid-April, we put out a video talking about, hey, things could get boring for a while, and sometimes we sort of just fade this into the summertime. In 2019, remember, it lasted until June. But a counterpoint to that is that the halving this time should come about, a month or so sooner. So you could argue that we're a month further along. But what I want to do is look at some of this momentum stuff, but also compare to other assets and other, say, like indices, right? So the first thing I want to do is actually do a comparison. So look at Bitcoin. It's still above the bull market support band, right? Is it not? You can zoom in. We're technically above it right now, right? And being technically correct is the best way to be correct. Good chance we're going to test it, right? Really good chance we're going to test it. We might, in fact, fall below it. I've said before, the pre-halving years, we typically spend about half the year above it. Or I haven't said that. I've said half the year we go up, half the year we go down. The implication is that you'd spend about half the year above it and half the year below it, right? You sort of wreck both sides, get everyone sufficiently wrecked, right? That's the general idea. Now, again, in 2019, we had another push up in June. In 2015, we were not nearly that fortunate, and we more or less just sort of hung around the lows for most of the year, where we only rallied about 80% above. When you look in 2015 from sort of a 30,000 feet view, certainly just does look like a sideways year. No one questions that, right? Most people look at this and say, well, it's sideways, sideways year. But remember, this was still, an 80% rally off the low, right? It was still a significant rally. It just looks sideways when you compare to what came after it, right? But if you were to zoom in over here, if this is all you saw, right? If you just saw this rally up, that still was a very significant rally by Bitcoin, and we still had, we still faded it here, and then we went up again, even up to this point, a little bit higher, and then still dropped another 49%. And this drop didn't occur until sort of the third quarter of the pre-halving year. Just something to consider, right? So with that in mind, take a close look at this, because we talked a lot about liquidity leaving the altcoin market and going to the blue chips. Now, you have Bitcoin, you have ETH, right? Those are the only blue chips in my opinion. Alts bleed to ETH and to Bitcoin. Theoretically, Ethereum bleeds to Bitcoin as well during this phase, although it's not doing it as quickly, but it still is technically putting in lower highs. We'll talk about that too. But look at Bitcoin USD with respect to the 20-week SMA. It's above it, right? It's above it. Now look at total, which is the entire market. We're below it, okay? So what does that mean? Bitcoin's above it. Total, which includes everything, is below it. So the entire asset class is starting to show some weakness, although at this point, we haven't had a weekly close below it, all right? Now here's where it gets really interesting, right? Bitcoin's above it. Total, slightly below it, not a weekly close yet. Total 2, which excludes Bitcoin, but includes everything else, right, including ETH, already had a weekly close below it last week. Okay, so Bitcoin, still above. Total, slightly below, no weekly close yet. Total 2, excluding Bitcoin. A weekly close below last week and now potentially a second week in a row. What do you think total 3 looks like? Which excludes both blue chips, right? Excluding both Bitcoin and Ethereum. What do you think that looks like? Total 2 already had a weekly close. And now we're in week number 2 of potentially putting in another close below it. Total 3, already 2 weekly closes below the 20-week SMA, and now potentially in the 3rd week. So what does this show you is happening, right? What does this show you? Well, we talked about, right? The altcoin market is highly illiquid, and people are flocking to the relative safety of the blue chips. That sends the dominance of Bitcoin higher. Does it not, right? Look at this. Bitcoin dominance, it's still well above the bull market support band, right? I mean, you have Bitcoin USD, which is about to test it. The dominance is so far above it, it's got plenty of wiggle room. Plenty. This is still trending high. I mean, look, yeah, locally it's trending down, right? And everyone's losing their collective minds. But the other way you look at it is you say, well, it's kind of maybe holding the support at where it previously kind of held resistance. And it still is trending higher. Look at, you knew I was going to work in the dominance into this video, right? Look at monthly candles on the dominance. Look at this. Look, you have 2 green and a red, 2 green and a red. And if you do the Heikin-Ashi, I mean, this is a very bullish trend. I mean, these are large candle bodies, overshadows, no undershadows, or if they are, they're very small. So again, right, Bitcoin USD in an uptrend, right, in an uptrend. And recently, it's starting to fade. Now, what I want to do is I want to compare to 2019. Because if you look at these candles, we talked about the idea of a summer lull, right, where the price action sort of fades off. Look at this. We're down, what, 11% this month? Okay, 11%. But Heikin-Ashi, probably worthwhile to look at this phase, right? You had 4 candles up and the 5th candle started to fade and the candle body was a lower high, right, compared to this one. So, we're in our 5th candle now, right? So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 trended higher. The 5th one faded, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 trended higher. The 5th one faded. And then this is what we talked about. We've talked about this idea of sort of fading for a good portion of the year, just like we did in 2019. Again, could there be another push higher? Maybe, right? But there are some momentum indicators that are starting to be a little bit weak. One of them is, if you take a look at the weekly, so let's look at weekly candles. We've already closed below the 10-week, right? Now you might say, well, Ben, no one cares about the 10-week SMA. And you might be right, but I mean, the reality is in 2019, once we had a weekly close below, that was all she wrote. I mean, the high was in for the year. Once we had a weekly close below the 10-week moving average after that initial 2019 impulse, once we had weekly close below, I mean, we rallied back up a little bit, put in a lower high. But again, it was in fact just a lower high. So, close below the 10-week. So, how we close below the 10-week here? You can see we avoided it in March. This one opened below the 10-week, but it still closed above it. We're back below the 10-week, right? We're below it. Something to consider. Also to consider is the 100-day, right? Take a look at the 100-day. So in 2019, what happened with the 100-day? Right, we rallied for a while, right? And then once we fell below the 100-day, technically we kind of pushed back above it at some point. It was a lower high, and we just faded. And I mean, you can see right now that we did have a daily close around it over here, but it's more or less held the line. Right now, we just had a daily close below the 100-day, right? Pretty clearly, too, right? It's not just sort of like right on the line, but a pretty clear close below the 100-day SMA. And so, I mean, there are some momentum indicators that are sort of fading here, okay? So, again, I mean, like, we've talked about this before, and it's going on in tech stocks too, right? The altcoin market bleeds to ETH and Bitcoin. Theoretically, ETH bleeds to Bitcoin as well. The dominance goes up, and it sends the Bitcoin USD valuation higher at the expense of the altcoin market liquidity, okay? At some point, the altcoin market liquidity can no longer sustain the Bitcoin price, right? And then when Bitcoin rolls back over, which again, I mean, like you might say, well, what if it doesn't? Well, I mean, it already has to some degree. It's already dropped $5,000. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to have to keep going down, but the idea is that as Bitcoin rolls over, the altcoin market gets even more wrecked. Is that not what's going on, right? Is it not? If you look at Bitcoin USD with respect to the bull market support band, it's above it. Total 2, excluding Bitcoin, but including ETH, is below it. Total 3, below it. Where's ETH? It's still above it, right? So it's sort of doing what Bitcoin's doing right now, right? It's a blue chip, right? I've said before, I think ETH is a blue chip. I still think it bleeds back to Bitcoin during this phase, but technically speaking, based on, well, maybe not technically, but in my opinion, it's a blue chip. So we essentially have this dynamic where this liquidity from the lower liquidity assets are seeking out the relative safety of the higher liquid assets, right? Because in times of economic uncertainty, which, I mean, I guess times are always uncertain, but in times like this where there's plenty of macro stuff to talk about, inverted yield curve, high inflation, a more hawkish Fed than we've seen in 40 years, people are going to seek out the relative safety of the blue chips within that asset class, right? Now, a blue chip to you might be different than a blue chip to me. And, if you're in one market, people that are not in crypto would sort of scoff at the idea of calling Bitcoin a blue chip. But it's all about within the asset class that you're interested in, what is the blue chip considered, right? And in crypto, it's Bitcoin. And in my opinion, Ethereum, although there would be a lot of people that would say Ethereum is not, I would say Bitcoin and ETH are in fact the blue chips of the Cryptoverse. I mean, the other stuff sort of comes and goes, but that's my opinion. And the alt market, right? I mean, did it ever stand a chance? I mean, it was closing below the 20-week SMA at the beginning of May, right? When Bitcoin was still, back up here at like 29K. So look at this. Look at it a different way. Bitcoin USD it would have to drop 25% to reach its March low. 25%. It's a lot, right? It can easily happen, right? But it's 25%. And how far would total 3 have to drop to reach it? 5%. Right? So that's why we talk about at length, right? Like what's, the opportunity cost in the altcoin market is just so high because most everything, the idea is that they sort of just bleed back to Bitcoin. So it's interesting, right? I mean, and then you have this example of like, well, what if Bitcoin USD let's go through a couple of scenarios, right? Scenario 1, right, is we hold the line, right? So if Bitcoin holds the 20-week SMA and bounces, then what happened when Bitcoin bounced over here? The dominance went up a lot, right? So we saw the dominance go from, if we just don't take my word for it, right? Don't trust, verify. If we add the Bitcoin dominance over here, when we sort of held the line at the 20-week back in March, what happened? The dominance shot up. Right? So if we hold it again, the dominance would likely go up a lot. So that's scenario 1. What's scenario 2? We don't hold it, right? And we fall below it. And what do you think happens in that environment? Well, history shows that normally when we get that weekly close below the 20-week, the altcoin market bleeds profusely against Bitcoin. Think about what happened once Bitcoin had these weekly closes back over here in December. It was right here when we talked about, look, we had a weekly close below. It's typically a smart idea to get out of the altcoin market, right? Especially when it shows the inability to get back above it, right? And you can see throughout all of December, we tried, and I was open to the idea, but it didn't happen. And then we got rejected. And then we talked about, look, altcoins are too risky, right? In Q1, altcoins are far too risky because if this bear market continues to take hold, the altcoin market is just simply going to go down against Bitcoin for what? 18 to 24 months. That's more or less what's happened. Okay. Now, in the pre-halving year, you would generally expect, generally speaking, half up, half down. Generally, right? I mean, look, you don't take it to the bank. They're not cashing it in, but look at 2019 year-to-date ROI. Someone was talking about how Bitcoin's been stronger this year than in 2019. I don't think that's the case. I mean, if Bitcoin had followed its 2019 path, it'd already be at like, much higher than where it is right now. In fact, it arguably is following a more tempered version of it, more say like an average of 2015 and 2019. And even then, I mean, maybe that's too optimistic, right? I don't know. But again, what I've said many times, right? I've said this many, many times. If Bitcoin is going to push higher this year, I think it needs to do so in the first half of the year. Okay. I think the latter half is mostly going to be reserved for fading whatever these moves are. And we could have already started that fade. It doesn't have to follow what it did in 2019. I think it's sort of a common misconception. People say it's going to have to follow it. But look, we have two pre-halving years to really compare to. You have 2029, we're in 2023 right now. We compare to 2019. You can also compare to 2015, which, I mean, it was pretty humdrum during the time, right? I mean, no one really cared. But in this other sense, right, if you look at the monthly returns in the pre-halving years, right, like 2019 and 2015, just look at the chart, you typically spend about half the months going up, half the months going down. And so far, we've done 4 green months and 1 red month, although May is not over with yet. There's a chance that it ends up being green. Who am I to say that Bitcoin can't rally to turn this green? But so far, it's been 4 green. Therefore, for the rest of the year, I'd probably expect, 2 to 3 more green months max, and likely going to see some red months, more red months than green months from here until the end of the year is my guess. This should not come as news. We've talked about this literally since January, that we should have about 6 green, 6 red. It could be 5 and 7 or 7 and 5, but that would be my general expectation for the duration of this year. Could something else happen? Sure, right? I'm just going based on what the data shows, what's historically happened in the pre-halving year. And what normally happens in the pre-halving year is everyone gets excited because we get a rally, and everyone calls for new highs, and then it fades. And then everyone's like, well, what's going on? We have a way of getting ahead of ourselves. And one issue that we've talked about before is we have this sort of these meme coin rallies that can often happen in the pre-halving year. And Bitcoin has a way of sort of, of punishing this. And by Bitcoin sort of fading a move, the altcoin market, can significantly get hit. And that liquidity, people just get so sick and tired of it, and then they finally just sort of go back to Bitcoin. And then by the time we get to the halving year, everyone, mostly everyone has their maxi hat on by that point because they just got wrecked in the altcoin market for 2 years straight. And then Bitcoin goes on the real bull run. That's historically what's happened. And it normally takes 2 years after the peak for people to finally get the memo to say, hey, like the meme coin market doesn't lead the cryptoverse, right? Bitcoin leads. And if Bitcoin sniffs out at some point that too much liquidity is flowing into these, meme coins that provide no utility, it will punish them, right? It will. And that's what it historically has done. The meme coins that rally back over here in 2019, I guarantee most of you'd have no idea what they even are today. Why? You don't have any reason to. They basically all went to zero. So who cares? Okay? So now that Bitcoin's sort of falling in here to the 20-week SMA, we talked about, okay, well, if it holds, the dominance should go up. If we don't hold it, the dominance should go up. Well, why would that be the case? What proof is there that the dominance would go up if we don't hold it? What proof is there? Is there any proof? Well, I would say this. Historically, if you look at, and maybe, comparing to see Ethereum is probably the most prudent thing to do. I mean, you can see that Ethereum has just been putting in a series of lower highs. I mean, and that's just a fact. Just one lower high after another, okay? I don't really think this time's going to be any different. In fact, May often marks a local high for the Ether Bitcoin pair. I mean, look at where the Ether Bitcoin pair rallied in 2022, and look at where that final local high was, right? It occurred in May. Go look at prior, some of these other time frames. Go look back in 2018. This local high was in May. And I mean, this one here was in about mid-June, so a little bit later. Right? This one was in March, and then you had another local high here in May, and so on and so forth. You can find plenty of examples Here's May as well, somewhere right there, before the Ether Bitcoin valuation faded. And we can look at it like this, where you might have to squint your eyes, or we could pull up a table, right? So here's a table, and sorry, I wish I could, there we go. So what this table shows us, sorry, let me, before you guys get mad, let me move my video. So I would say just pause the video and look at this table for a few minutes, okay? So what it essentially shows you, it shows you when Bitcoin breaks above the 20-week SMA to when it breaks below, or when it breaks below to when it breaks back above. And literally 9 out of 9 times, every single time, from weekly close below the 20-week SMA to weekly close above the 20-week SMA by Bitcoin USD, the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation went down. 9 out of 9 times, more or less, right? I mean, you might find some instances where it's basically equal, but more or less, you have 9 out of 9 times it worked. When it went above the 20-week SMA to closing below, Ethereum has always outperformed every single time, except one time. When do you think that was? When do you think Ethereum underperformed Bitcoin when Bitcoin was above the 20-week SMA? Right? There's been plenty of examples through here where Bitcoin underperforms Ethereum when Bitcoin is above its 20-week SMA. We're not talking about Ethereum. I don't care about the 20-week SMA for Ethereum. I'm saying when Bitcoin was above its own 20-week SMA until closing back below it, Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation went up, except for one time. What time was that? Glad you asked. Fail right here. 2019. From break up to break down in 2019. The pre-halving year is when that actually happened. Okay, the pre-halving year. So when did Bitcoin break above it this time? Let's go take a look, right? And let's go see what's going on. So it broke above it in January of 2023, the week of January 9th. Now go take a look at the Ether Bitcoin valuation. Where was it the week of January 9th? It's all the way up here at 075. So again, you have an example in the pre-halving year where the Ether Bitcoin valuation underperformed even when Bitcoin USD was above its 20-week SMA, right? So the pre-halving year should be treated differently than, say, like the halving year or the post-halving year or whatever, right? You can see that the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation has bled in 2023 just as it did in 2019 when Bitcoin USD broke above its 20-week moving average, at least so far. Furthermore, if you were to go take a look at monthly returns for the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, you would notice that on average, the first 5 months tend to be green, but starting in June through the rest of the year, on average, it tends to be red. Now, not every single year that's occurred, but on average, right, with large standard deviations, it's been red. In fact, most Junes have been red. Except for 2. And one of them was only 0.5% to the upside. You'd have to go back to 2017 to find a significant move by Ether Bitcoin to the upside in June. Normally it just goes down by double digits or so. So going back to the discussion, so you're saying that if Bitcoin holds the line and bounces up like it did in March, the dominance goes up. And if it doesn't hold the line and falls back below and fades this rally, right? Like it faded over here and like it faded it over here, then the dominance also goes higher. Why does the dominance go higher? Because the altcoin market has nowhere to hide, my friends. I mean, it's already below the 20-week moving average. So let's imagine a scenario where Bitcoin bounces but puts in a lower high, right? So let's imagine a scenario where Bitcoin, let's see, path. So let's imagine a scenario where Bitcoin sort of falls back in and bounces, but it's just a lower high like 2019. So you could see Bitcoin go back up, but total 3 could go back up and just get rejected by the 20-week, right? So a bounce off the 20-week SMA for, say, Bitcoin could just be, and a potential lower high could just be the altcoin market retracing back to its bull mark support band from underneath it and then just getting rejected. And that is how the altcoin market gets so wrecked during this phase of the market cycle. That's how it happens. Because the thesis, right, is that no matter the direction of Bitcoin USD, the dominance should go up either way. And in the pre-halving year, we normally would expect half up and half down. It's just my general expectations, right? I mean, we always get ahead of ourselves in the pre-halving year, but that is historically at some point it fades. Now, are we fading it now? Potentially. Could we fade it? Could it get another bounce and then fade? It's possible, but there are some of these momentum indicators. If you look at some of the moving averages and whatnot, they are starting to fade. I mean, there's another indicator. I don't even know what it looks like, right? But let's go check out. I know some people like the MACD. I mean, it actually, okay, look, it just turned red on the weekly. So what happened in 2019 when it turned red? I don't even know because I don't really follow this indicator. I'm guessing it turned, once it turned red, that was it, right? You can see right here in July, it turned red, and it meant the highs were in. So there is a chance here, right, that this move is just being faded and the altcoin market gets wrecked. And the altcoin market's already near the March low, despite the fact that Bitcoin is not. So if Bitcoin were to go to the March low, where do you think that puts the altcoin market? You could argue that Bitcoin retracing back to its March low at some point later this year could put the altcoin market at new lows, or at least at the prior lows back in December, which are still well below the March lows. So there's a lot going on right now. And note too that the dollar is, despite all the FUD, so far it's back above its 20-week SMA and it sort of held its own prior low, potentially double bottom. Now, this could just be a lower high. We'll have to wait and see, but there's been a lot of FUD on the dollar, and so far it's still holding pretty strong. So just to recap, right? Bitcoin USD falling into the bull market support band. Total, slightly below it, but not a weekly close yet. Total 2, already below it with 1 weekly close below it. Total 3, already 2 weekly closes below it. Liquidity flowing from higher risk assets to lower risk assets. For a certain period of time, the higher risk assets can help support the USD valuations of the lower risk assets because that liquidity is going back to those blue chips. But at some point when the blue chips roll over because there's no longer enough liquidity from the altcoin market to sustain them, then the altcoin market gets even more wrecked because they already have so little liquidity because so many people already converted them to the blue chips. So that's how the altcoin market gets wrecked no matter the direction of Bitcoin USD. And it's also why the Bitcoin dominance should go higher. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.